Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Italian Literature School at Athens. Καλησπέρα σε όλους και καλώς ήρθατε στην δεύτερο σχολείο γνώμη. Tonight we arrived at the last meeting of the third floor seminar cycle. Since 2018, this cycle has been organized by the postdoctoral fellows of the Italian School to organize a formal discussion about topics and things that are related to their research project. First, I've been taught in the classroom at the third floor of our building, but the increasing of attendance to our seminars led us to move here, the largest lecture room. But our idea to have an informal atmosphere in the room. I'm pleased to see many of us, but also on the internet. And I want to thank Professor Papi and the organizer of the scientific organizer of the seminars, Professor Hellenic, for giving us this opportunity. But many thanks to my colleagues Isabella, Georgia, and Christina, who shared with us in the organization of students. But many thanks also to Mr. Michalis Foukatis for his help, and for doctors Carlo Domenica and Paola Corusa, who shared news about our events on the internet. Tonight, our guest is Sophia Zoumbaki. She's the Director of Research of the Section of Greek and Roman Antiquities of the Institute of Historical Studies of the National Hellenic Research Foundation at Nicoidrima Erenon. After her studies at the National and Kabbalistic University of Athens, she obtained her Master of Philosophy and Doctor of Philosophy degree at the Institute of Ancient History and Epigraphy at the University of Vienna, before returning in Athens as a researcher in the National Research Foundation. Between research years, there are focused on the history of Hellenistic and Roman Greece, and mostly are focused on the cartography and Roman onomastics of the Roman world. For instance, we may remember works about Roman presence in Peloponnese and especially in Elis. But in the last few years, our attention focused on the Cyclades beyond Delos, that for this point of view has been a bit neglected by scholars, also because the overabundance of evidence from Delos attracted most of the attention of scholars. So tonight, Sophia will talk to us about Cyclades in Hellenistic and Roman times, and especially their relationship with Rome, and the Roman presence are shown by the epigraphic evidence in Cyclades. And she will focus on some case studies, particularly significant, such as Neros, but won't be missing some news about Delos and some instances about the relationship that these characters from these islands had with Italy. So thank you, Sophia, for your presence here, and I leave you the floor, and thank you everybody for being here.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for coming here. I thank also those attending on the web. And of course, I would like to thank the Italian Archaeological School and especially Marcello Gelone for the invitation to participate in this seminar and present something on my beloved Cyclades. I will start with Aelius Aristides and his words on the navigation in the Aegean. If you break up your sailing in the middle of the sea, you come across lands with towns and villages as small continents surrounded by water. The seafarer in the Cyclades comes across small, isolated communities which, despite their proximity to each other, display a remarkable diversity as small separate continents, exactly as Aelius Aristides describes them. The islands, which are scattered in a circle around Delos, hence Cyclades, never formed a political or cultural unity. Natural isolation of the geographically fragmented world of the Cyclades and diverse local traditions resulted in an amazing wealth of local political organizations, economic patterns, epigraphic habits, cultural evolutions. On the other hand, connectivity among the Cycladic islands is a factor which should not be underestimated, as the sea is an inviting cohesive tissue. The vicinity, which is obvious if we look at the Cyclades from above, so the vicinity, accessibility, and the visibility of the islands on the pellucid horizon of the Aegean, coastal shipping and trade, as well as the exploitation of the marine wealth, encourage contacts and the emergence of various stronger or looser networks. So insularity and connectivity, a duality over which much ink has been spilled, are constant factors of the life of the Cyclades throughout their history. As I said, the Cyclades never formed a political unity. Attempts at the unification of major parts of the Cyclades under larger organisms, for example, under the Athenian hegemony or the koinon των Isioton, were short-lived schemes initiated by external powers. The islands, or some of them, passed from one sovereign to the other during the turbulent Hellenistic period. Attalids, Ptolemaians, Rhodians, Athenians, the kings of Pontus, all handled them as booty of war or as naval bases. Pirates of various origins were for long periods the masters of the seas, and this affected the islands, as epigraphic evidence reveals. Romans did not deal with the Cyclades as a whole. It is known that Delos passed under Athenian control in 167 BC. Cicero writes that Sulla gave some islands to Rhodes as a reward for its pro-Roman stance during the Mithridatic Wars, without specifying which islands were given. Mark Antony rewarded Rhodes with Anthros, Tinos, and Naxos, and also Athens with Chaos for their support in his conflict with Cassius. Even on the administrative level, Even on the administrative level, the Roman rule obviously did not handle the Cyclades as a whole. Although the administrative status of the islands under Roman rule is not known in detail and apparently underwent various modifications over time, it seems that not all islands belonged to the same administrative district during the Roman period. It seems that Delos and Chaos were considered Athenian dependencies and thus followed Athens in the administrative system of Romans, while the other Cyclades should have formed part of the province of Asia. We should, however, take into account that the term provincia was used in the late Republic in order to define a short-term military responsibility. a task or a sphere of influence assigned to a Roman magistrate. And later, the concept of provincia began expanding to signify a territorial possession of the Roman people. It was later that it more fully conceptualized territorial entities. It was rather a person-centered than a place-centered administrative system, in which province was initially understood rather as a task than as a territory. This explains all this flexibility of the administration. It is only from the late 1st century AD that the Cyclades are mentioned as insulae Cyclades or nisi Cyclades in a handful of official documents which refer to some Roman officers. Two of them are low-ranking functionaries, both procurators of vicesima hereditatium, namely tax collectors of 5% on inheritance. One is responsible of the region of Caria and the Cyclades. The other is responsible for Cyclades too, but as part of a wider periphery, including Asia, Lycia, Phrygia, and Galatia. Further, two imperial legati pro praetore are known, both of Mark Aurelius's age, perhaps one succeeding the other. The legatus Augusti ad ordinando status insularum Cycladum, legatus provinciae Asiae Caius Vetius Abinianus Iulius Hospes, and Lucius Evinius Proculus attested in a Greek inscription as presbeftis autokratoron nison Cycladon, and in a Latin inscription as legatus pro praetore Asiae et insularum Cycladum. Thus, the Cyclades are not mentioned as part of a standard administrative entity, but along with different regions of Asia Minor in various documents. Nevertheless, we do not know whether all or some and which of the Cycladic islands were included in the periphery called Insulae Cyclades. Further, there are some mentions of nisi Cyclades in the inscriptions from Syros. Here, two examples, there are more, recording public banquets and distributions of foodstuff and money on the part of the Archontes Stephaniphoroi. Among the participants, the foreign residents from other Cycladic islands are mentioned. It is interesting because mentions of the other Cyclades by the inhabitants of one of the islands as a part of their direct neighborhood or as part of a special unity are very rare. So how did the Roman rule deal with the scattered and remote insular microcosms, and vice versa? How did locals deal with Rome as a center from which power and influence on many levels, administrative, economic, social, and cultural, emerged? What did these lands on the fringe of the Roman world represent for Rome? An inhabitant of a Cycladic island, especially of a small and remote one, would perhaps have never seen a representative of the Roman rule in his land. Roman magistrates, exactly like members of the imperial family, were extremely rarely present in the Cyclades. Honorific monuments for the emperors and the performance of the imperial cult were constant reminiscent of the distant but omnipresent figure of the emperor and, of course, of Rome. Some islands had some contact with Roman exiles, since Cyclades were used as places of banishment. I will not go further into details on this issue because it has been sufficiently analyzed by many scholars. Some of the Roman magistrates had a loose contact with the islands, as the tax collectors whom I mentioned before. Others were known just as names appearing in inscriptions in public display in the Cyclades without maintaining any contact at all with the islands. A case of this sort is the reference to consuls as a chronological datum, as here in an inscription, a consolation decree from Amorgos. The islanders of the Roman period saw such names in official documents set up in the public space of their towns, but these people had, of course, no contact with the islands. Beyond names of certain magistrates, Roman names of private individuals started to appear in inscriptions of the islands as Roman citizenship started to be spread, as everywhere. However, diffusion of Roman citizenship and consequently of Roman names was in the Cyclades neither abundant nor equal. Diffusion of Roman names and Roman citizenship followed different paths in the diverse societies of each island. Although the randomness of the epigraphic attestations is to be taken into consideration, one cannot avoid the observation that different names occur on every island, and the first attestations of Roman names are of a different date on each island. The number of bearers of Roman names varies from island to island, but it is in general small. And in the case of some islands, not even one bearer of Roman citizenship or of Roman names is attested in the existing sources. The small number of bearers of Roman names or the complete absence of evidence are to be regarded, however, as a historical argument of equal importance with the numerous bearers of Roman names attested in other regions. Generally, the number of bearers of Roman names in the Cyclades is limited, and even more limited is the number of locals who bear Roman names. Here I have to say that not all of them were Roman citizens. Some do not bear the full Roman name, the tria or the duonomina. They bear just a Latin name as a personal name, instead of bearing a Greek one. It was just out of their personal choice, out of taste, out of fashion. Therefore, only a small number of local individuals enjoyed the legal status and privileges of the Roman citizens. They were probably a minority which stood out in the insular microcosms. Even individuals who certainly belonged to the local elites and possessed considerable wealth appear without Roman names or with simplicia nomina Romana, that is, isolated elements of Roman names, which do not necessarily imply possession of Roman citizenship. A striking example are the majority of the consolation decrees from Amorgos, which record the participation of the whole community in the grief of prominent families and in the funerals of members of the elite. These prominent families hardly include Roman citizens before the Constitution Antoniniana. Looking once again at the consolation decree from Amorgos, which I showed shortly before, and which is dated just 4 or 5 years before the Constitution Antoniniana, we realize that not even one of the civic magistrates, mentioned in bold, not even one of them is a Roman citizen, and no member of the mourning family possesses Roman citizenship, with a possible but not certain exception of the mother of the deceased, the Thyrean Claudia, daughter of Leonidas. The absence of a cognomen here makes us suspicious. The name Claudia is perhaps not to be regarded as an indication of her belonging to the gens Claudia, but is perhaps just a proper name, a personal choice out of taste, fashion, or whatever. Even imperial gentilicia are not especially attested in the Cyclades. Iuli, Claudi, Flavi, Ulpi, Eli are not especially encountered in the epigraphic sources of the islands. Even Aureli are abundantly attested only on Amorgos and Paros, of course after the Constitution Antoniniana, whereas a handful of Aureli is to be found on Thyra, Andros, Milos, a few more on Tinos, and only one bearer of the name on Naxos and Syros. And of course, on some other islands, not even one Aurelius is attested in the written sources. Certainly, there should have been more Aureli, as everywhere after the Constitution Antoniniana, but the image emerging from the preserved epigraphic material is noteworthy, as it probably implies that for the vast majority of the free people of the Cyclades, who acquired Roman citizenship through Caracalla's edict, there was hardly an opportunity to leave an epigraphic hint behind. This shows, in general, the limited social and economic potentials of the inhabitants of the Cyclades. Of course, we can recall literary sources which project the pessimistic image of the Cyclades during the Roman period, an image of marginality, poverty, and decline. I will not repeat these references. They have been abundantly analyzed by scholars, also by me. I will say only that despite exaggerations or generalizations concerning poverty, decline, and marginality of the Cyclades, the Cycladic societies of the Roman period obviously included a large part of poor people living in isolation and hardly participating in the evolutions of that period. So, limited diffusion of Roman citizenship in the Cyclades is apparently to be explained on the basis of the limited access of the insular societies, even of the elites, to the circles of influential Roman notables. Or perhaps, as Cedric Brelat and Els Rose say, referring not to the Cyclades, but generally to communities of the East, Roman citizenship was not necessarily considered attractive for all local elites, who remained committed to their home cities and primarily acted in accordance with their own local or regional agenda. So, given this situation, rare gentilicia, especially of an early day, point rather to Italian and Roman residents or to individuals enfranchised by them. The presence of Westerners is in any case attested in the epigraphic sources, with great differences from island to island, as different families seem to have been based on different islands at different times, and obviously for different reasons. The majority of Western families are represented only on one island each. This is clear in this table. Out of the 60, almost 60 rare names attested on the Cyclades, I have not included common names, the imperial names, and I have not included Delos. Out of these 60 names, only 20, those marked in red, are attested on more than one island. And only the numbers in green represent 2 or more individuals on an island. In the majority of the cases, only one bearer of every name exists on every island. Although randomness or even paucity of epigraphic attestations are to be taken into account, diversity and lack of continuity of the presence of Westerners are to be observed. Some names are attested only in the Republican period and then they disappear. Some others are attested in the 1st century AD, and some others are for the first time attested even later, in the 2nd or the 3rd century. A frequent explanation for the presence of Westerners in the Cyclades is that they came to other islands only after Delos's collapse. However, the names themselves do not support this argument. 39 names attested on the Cyclades are not encountered on Delos. And further, the first attestations of some names are to be dated before the decline of Delos. At first, sporadic attestations of individuals of Greek background from Magna Graecia are to be found in the Cyclades already in the 3rd century BC, and from the 2nd century, also Romans are attested. Their choice certainly depended on the profit opportunities, on the exploitable natural resources, on the tradable products of each island. Some examples. A fragmentary catalogue from Tinos mentioning individuals from Taras, Rhegium, Syracuse, Croton, perhaps Proxene, dated to the 3rd century BC. A certain Timon, son of Nymphodoros from Syracuse, is honored in 2 decrees found on Tinos, one erected by the Polis and the other by the Nisiotic League. Timon helped the Nisiotic League in the purchase of grain. They are dated to the beginning of the 2nd century BC. This individual is also honored on Delos. He is attested on more Delian inscriptions, and his son is attested also as a banker on Delos. Perhaps both were settled on Delos, but they had contacts with Tinos, as we saw. Still on Tinos, an individual from Neapolis, 2nd century BC, is honored as Proxenos for his benefactions to the polis of Tinos. And around the turn to the 1st century BC, a certain Apollonius, defined as Romeos, is also honored on Tinos. Italiots appear also as proxeni on Thera, along with Romei, as we see here. In a funerary inscription from Milos, we see a Tarentine, and the father name of the deceased Hykane is Tiberius, and a gravestone from Naxos, now held at the Musée Calvet in Avignon, dated to the 2nd or the 1st century BC, bears the name of Tertia, daughter of Jason, defined as Brentesini from Brundisium. Increasing exchanges of Italians in the East led to the need for some commercial base where they could enjoy certain facilitations. So from 167 BC, Delos was declared a free port under Athenian control, and Italians were settled in large numbers on the island. The vivid Italian community interacted on an economic and cultural level with merchants of various origins who often established dynamic professional associations already around the middle of the 2nd century BC. In this environment, Italians on Delos appear in inscriptions under various definitions, either implying professional associations such as naukleroi, that is ship owners, emporoi, that is merchants, oinopolai, that is wine merchants. Or they bear definitions referring simply to them as a distinct group among the inhabitants of the island, among those doing business on the island. In the melting pot of Delos, various cultural and religious backgrounds coexisted, as studies on various cults on the island or studies on Orientals on Delos have shown. People of various origins and cultures not only coexisted, but also interacted and mutually affected each other, as I believe arises from Paul Ernst's recent book. I have no intention to speak long about Delos. I will only refer to a new, not discovery, to a new rediscovery of an inscription, which I recently connected with Delos and tried to place it into its historical context, highlighting its importance. I will refer to it because I think that it shows clearly the importance of Delos during the period of its peak. This inscription, which was published under the inscriptions of Aegina, was apparently transported from Delos during the period when Aegina was the capital of the new Hellenic state in the 19th century, when numerous antiquities were taken from Delos in order to be exhibited to the new museum. The inscription in question is on a mensa ponderaria, a sycoma, decorated with garlands and bucrania. Lucius Cocceius Lucii Filius, Lemonia Piso, Curator Corporis Oli, which is certainly to be completed as Oleariorum, Corpus Oleariorum, that is Association of Oil Merchants. My complete analysis is to be found in this article in the volume in honor of Eva Simantoni Bourgnan. Olearii, or Elaiopolai in Greek, as a professional association, appear otherwise in the East only on Delos. They are encountered in 3 more Delian inscriptions. This here, this is once more the inscription from Aegina. They are dated certainly before the decline of Delos. They appear as an organized corpus with a curator, Lucius Cocceius Piso. They were linked with powerful Roman magistrates Iulius Caesar the father, this inscription here. They owned private premises on Delos, paid for the construction and later for repairs of a temple of their protector deity Heracles, whose cult was transferred from Italy. The attested members of the Delian Olearii, as we see here, and their curator originated from Italy, but we cannot ascertain whether all members of Olearii were Italians. And of course, we do not know where the merchandised oil came from. In any case, it is remarkable that Italians monitored the oil commerce, indeed, not as single merchants with limited operation cycles, but as an organized association with a head office at Delos, the trade center of the Eastern Mediterranean, already in the early 1st century BC. Olearii, in charge of olive oil trade, a very important commercial branch for the supply chains of Rome and the army, that is the Annona, are attested at important Mediterranean ports in the next centuries. But the next epigraphic attestations of Olearii as dynamic associations representing whole provinces, Baetica in Spain or Africa, occur only in the 2nd century AD, as the examples shown here. Already before the decline of Delos, Westerners had appeared on other islands of the Cyclades. Romans are attested in the polis of Aegiali on Amorgos, among the groups that took part in public banquets funded by an endowment in the memory of a certain Aleximachos, son of Critolaos, dated to the 2nd century BC. The special mention of Romans, separately from other foreigners, shows the importance of the Roman community on the island. In the epigraphic record of the island, apart from an ephebic catalogue mentioning some bearers of Roman names and dated perhaps to the late 2nd or early 1st century BC, no other signs of Roman settlers exist. It is interesting that early Roman presence on some islands has no continuity, as I already said, and Amorgos is one case. This is also the case with Naxos. In the 1st century BC, some individuals are attested, among them Caius Curtius Mithris, who has been identified as the homonymous freedman of one of Cicero's friends, the wealthy banker Caius Curtius Postumus. Mithris is known from a recommendation letter of Cicero, it is mentioned here, a letter to the governor of Asia, Publius Servilius Isauricus. Cicero stresses his close friendship with Mithris, who was settled in Ephesus, and asks the governor to support the freedman in a lawsuit about some landed property. Stamps on amphora bearing the name of Mithris' patron, Postumus Curtius. These stamps have been found in Ephesus. These stamps prove Postumus' connection with wine trade, and Jean Hatzfeld suggested that Mithris owed his wealth to the exploitation of vineyards as well. We do not know whether Mithris owned land on Naxos, but it seems probable that it was viticulture that brought him there, since the island produced a famous wine of excellent quality. Mithris was therefore closely associated with the inhabitants of the island. They honor him. They apparently enjoyed his favor and benefactions, perhaps using his connections with powerful Romans. A further Curtius, Heracleo, attested on Naxos and Amorgos, has a different prenomen, Quintus. So I'm hesitant to connect him directly with Mithris. Further, on Naxos, a number of individuals who are guessed to be of Italian origin are attested as ephebs in a catalogue of the 1st century BC. Here the catalogue more clearly. They bear the names Aurelius, Aufidius, Kedicius, Polius, Extilius, Sulpicius. These names disappear thereafter from the epigraphic record from Naxos. This shows perhaps that their families abandoned the island, but the reasons are unknown. As on Naxos, individuals of Western origin are attested on Tinos in the 1st century BC, and then they disappear. Their rare gentle names, Aufidius, Lutatius, Publilius, Rubius, Rustius, show their Italian provenance, while the fact that they are attested as high office holders, such as strategoi or agoranomoi, point to their integration, or at least their intention to integrate into local the Tinian society. And this makes their disappearance more difficult to explain. Similarly, the Pandusini, perhaps descendants of a Pandusinus attested in Thisbe in Boeotia in 170 BC. Jean Hatzfeld identifies this Pandusinus as the grandson of this person. In any case, Pandusini disappeared from Tinos after the 1st century BC. And the Aufidii, here just a part of a large decree honoring Aufidii, father and son, the bankers, because they gave loans to the town at a lower rate than it was then usual. We do not know whether they were settled on Tinos or Delos, but of course their benefactions to Tinos are recorded in this decree. Of course, they disappear after the 1st century BC. On Paros, there are certain rare Roman names of a relatively early date, which could imply a Western origin of their bearers. Marble quarries attracted Kossuti, a family from Campania specialized in marble trade and marble work. So Kossuti are attested on Paros around the late Republic or early Empire. Kossuti are attested on nearby Ios as well. The gray blue marble of Ios is not of the Parian quality, but it would be perhaps used for secondary works, not for sculpture, but perhaps for buildings or for inscriptions. There was a marble quarry in the area of Paleopyrgos, and more specifically on the hill ridge between the Venetian castle of Paleopyrgos and Agia Theodoti Bay, where the arrow shows. The proximity of Ios to Paros strengthens the assumption that members of the gens Kossutia, who were attracted to Paros by the marble quarries, searched for marble resources on nearby Ios, especially for architectural use. After the Parian quarries became imperial property, the individuals engaged in their exploitation were imperial slaves and freedmen, such as the person of this inscription. Also, contractors, private contractors and state functionaries were involved in this, in the exploitation of Parian marble. Several names, the majority written in Latin, attested on blocks of Parian marble, which are preserved either on Paros or in Rome, obviously belong to such individuals who were involved in some phase of the extraction, transportation, control, or processing of marble. A large number of marble blocks were found in the channel, the so-called Fossa Traiana, running alongside the major port of Portus. This seems to have been a loading point for these materials, which were imported to Italy and, of course, destined ultimately for Rome. Further names attested on Paros, rare Roman names, point probably to a Western origin of their bearers. Some of them are attested on beautiful characteristic Parian sarcophagi, those bearing relief panels, each panel accompanied by inscriptions, such as these here, bearing the inscription of Lefkios and Nostios Apollonios. We move shortly to Folegandros. On the walls of the Chrysospilia cave, there are lots of male names written with mortar and sometimes additionally inscribed on the rock. Some of these names also bear ethnics, showing many individuals coming from abroad, especially from other islands of the Aegean. Among these individuals, there are apparently also Romans, as names written in Latin especially implied. The examination of the archaeological finds in the cave so far leads to the conclusion that we have to do with young boys who took part in rituals, perhaps coming to age rituals in the cave, and wrote their names in this unofficial record room. It is possible that young Romans who were temporary or permanent residents of Greek polis participated in these rituals, as they also participated in the ephivia, as we saw on Amorgos and Naxos. A number of non-imperial gentilicia which are attested relatively early on Andros point to the possibility that they were Western traders. Attisti, Attini, Clodi, Varisidi. A handful of Latin or bilingual inscriptions verify the presence of a Western social element. I will show one characteristic inscription with a mix of Greek and Latin alphabets. This mixture and the Greek name Diogenes, of the individual who had the piscina renovated betray perhaps an Italian of Greek origin from Magna Graecia. It is unknown whether the erroneous use of Latin is a result of the lack of familiarity of the stone cutter with the Latin language or of Diogenes' insufficient knowledge of Latin, though he nonetheless wished to advertise his Italian origin and his awareness of Roman building trends. As for the piscina, it is either to be understood as a pool or a reservoir of water forming part of a bath, or it could be a fish pond, an artificial fish enclosure. One of the most important Roman communities was apparently settled on Milos. The presence of Westerners on Milos is testified already earlier. I show once more the inscription I showed before. People bearing names such as Gellius, Cornelius, Magius, Novius, Plotius coexisted with a wealthy Jewish community. Jews on Milos are known from the narration of Josephus about the so-called Pseudo-Alexander, a Jewish pretender of the Augustan age, who was able to collect a large sum of money from the Jews of the island in order to sail to Italy. Mining resources obviously attracted Romans to Milos, where they invested in the opportunities for thriving commercial activities. Items of high demand from Milos were sulfur, Melian earth, and alum. Pliny, for example, reports that Melian alum was imported to Italy. We do not know whether a mercator, the Libertus Caius Caelius Eros, attested on Milos. This is the inscription of his gravestone. We do not know if he was engaged in this business. In any case, archaeological evidence testifies to an intensive Roman presence in sites of industrial or commercial character, some of them also with residential function. At certain sites of Milos, especially Agia Kyriaki and Paleochori, along with the extraction and processing of raw material, local pottery was produced, mainly lekanide, used for the processing, and amphore for the packing of alum. The identification of a certain type of amphore as an object of Melian manufacture, of a local manufacture, for the commercialization of alum, allowed the recognition of finds in Italy and other places of the Roman world as residues of containers of imported Melian mineral products. Various names on stamps and tituli picti on Melian, lekanide, and amphore found on Milos and at various spots of the Mediterranean are obviously trademarks of businessmen involved in production and trade of mineral resources, all of them in Latin. Have a look at this one, Cor, obviously Corneli, and I have to mention that we have numerous Corneli on Melos. When I say numerous, it is for the scale of the Cyclades. We have 11 Cornelii in a total of 50 bearers of Roman names on the island. Perhaps these Cornelii were, or some of them, were involved in the exploitation of mineral wealth. Of special importance are the Magi attested on Milos. Attested are two individuals, father and daughter. Father is Lucius Magius Eros, attested in this inscription, now lost. And the daughter appears in this inscription. Her name has been read in IG Erotos Thigatir Tiberiu Iuliu Gini, but after checking the stone, I could amend the name. It is to be completed as Magia Lefkiu Magiu Erotos Thigatir Pulchra. On the basis of the epigraphic material from Milos and my earlier correction of the name of this woman as Pulchra, in a recent article in SAIA, this shown here, I could identify this woman from Milos with a homonymous woman attested in the Zoumbaki archive in Pompeii. She borrowed in 45 AD 30,000 sestertii, a large amount of money, which she should repay in 6 months. Otherwise, the money would be doubled. Although it is surprising to find a woman from Milos involved in loans in Puteoli, where the Zoumbaki were based, she was not an isolated case. One more woman, Euploia, Ap Melo or Meliaka in other documents, borrowed repeatedly money in 42-43 AD under the tutorship and surety of the Athenian Epicharis. As for her, she is perhaps a member of a family which was later connected with the Cornelii of Milos. This is an inscription bearing a family which can be connected with this Euploia, their descendants. I will not repeat here my argumentation. It is presented in the aforementioned article. It is possible that both Euploia and Magia Pulchra were involved in long-distance trade of highly demanded Melian mineral products, and both needed cash in the busy harbor of Puteoli. As I mentioned already at the beginning of my talk, attestations of Romans in the Cyclades are isolated, and the majority of the cases lack continuity. Of course, I could not present the evidence of the Western presence in the Cyclades in its entirety because of the limited time. I tried to offer some snapshots of the realities of the Roman Cyclades, and I hope that I could make clear that these small, isolated microcosms scattered in the middle of the Aegean in an environment which is inviting for mobility, navigation, connectivity, could be seen as an El Dorado for various Romans and Italians who settled there for longer or shorter periods of time. They were certainly attracted by profit-making opportunities, which were facilitated by the unification of the communication and commercial routes and the increasing demand for new products in the Roman world. The reason why these people disappeared from the epigraphic record of the islands in the majority of the cases is not easily traceable. Perhaps one reason was piracy, which was definitely eliminated only by Augustus. Perhaps the isolation of the islands was an inhibitory factor for traders who became wealthy and had ambitions for a social advancement. Opportunities for social mobility were certainly offered in big cities and commercial centers, and not in the remote Cyclades. We can also think of other reasons related to each island separately. For example, the fact that the Parian marble quarries were included in the imperial property was a reason why Kossuthi did not stay longer on Paros. In any case, as Oli Salomis has suggested on the basis of the names, new waves of Westerners kept coming to the East even in the 2nd and the 3rd century AD. The beauty of the Aegean played apparently no role in their decision to invest in the region, but was certainly enjoyed by them during their sojourn on some island or during their navigation in the waters of the Cyclades. So I would close with Aelius Aristides as I started. Even a person who has no need to travel would do so for one reason only, to sail across the Aegean. Beauty is the emblem of the Aegean Sea. And we would say that beauty begins where the islands begin, just as you cross the Barents Sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for your overview about Cyclads, Cyclads that continues to flourish with the economy also after the collapse of the Port of Delos. And obviously, I've been interested about your insights about deals, but also about the questions of the families from Delos and other families. Difficult to say where relationships between families and the part of Delos to the other. Yeah. There are no one. If they can start with some question. The first is about Oleari, obviously. You mentioned the litigation from Delos, especially one to Julius Caesar, that the father of the most and you mentioned the one on the marble block, but there is another one, another litigation to Julius Caesar on another Cyclads from Delos, even if yes, but you imagine it's probably made also the application by and I think you agree.
I know I have mentioned the article but I didn't want to show everything here because Oleari are not mentioned in this description. But if I remember well, this mensa ponderaria has been found in the region of the so-called magazines, the storerooms. So
in front of the port.
In front, yes, in the forefront of the sea. So it is possible that it was erected somewhere in front or in the storerooms of the oil merchants. But the Oleari are not mentioned.
Are not mentioned, but maybe they made the dedication.
It is possible.
Because men's purse in the Cyclads is for liquids. So not only for grain, but then second is for measuring liquids, but like
but also wine.
Well, yes, also wine, and yes, there are also Napoli there also, and Julius Caesar is at that time was a proconsul, so maybe according to your opinion, there was some control of the Roman consulate in the association of Oleari, or they were independent?
Well, we do not know exactly what the relationship between this person, the proconsul and the Oleari was. But the Oleari were a very important association. It was very important for the supply chain of Rome itself. So the Roman magistrates certainly were very interested in controlling the oil commerce or helping those merchants if they needed something. So I guess that
the association. And another question, you spoke about the usual the bankers, bankers from that were active on Delos and Pinos. And you say that it's difficult to say if they were active interest in Delos or then in Pinos, or both during the same period, Delos and Pinos. And what do you think about the interpretation of the Maison des Sceaux in Delos? Because many scholars think that there was the house of Philip, also with the archive, with the Quetle from the same house. What do you think about the interpretation?
Well, I'm not the right person to ask, and Paul Ernst has written about this house in his book. I don't know because the archaeological documentation of this house is not very
clear,
very clear. So I don't know. It seems that it was a private house. You mean if it was private or
not only this, but if there was the house of Michel Phoebe, also think about things is convinced that the house was.
Yes, it can be because it seems that on Delos we have houses and business bases under the same roof. On the ground floor, there were the big offices or the shops of the various merchants, and on the upper floor,
There was the office with the account.
seems that I'm not a specialist in such things, but things.
There are two portraits of a young man, and but also other scholar things that
they combined the work and
the portraits show Lucius of his father and so on. So maybe
they were settled there, but of course they were in contact with other islands. Tinos is one case.
some questions from okay, Daniela.
Thank you for your presentation. Thinking about the stable residence of Roman people in the city, I was wondering how many of the description that has been displayed are funerary.
Well, the majority of the descriptions are funerary or dedication. Some things like this honoring Alcibi, but the majority of the cases is known from funerary inscriptions or from dedications. Not many, in any case. Not many. I've tried to collect every indication, every piece of evidence, and if you place all these pieces of evidence together, you get some image, some picture. But in any case, there is not much evidence, and what we have is without continuity, as I said. Isolated cases, it is difficult to trace connections with one case with the other, and even families such as those Zoumbaki or Milos, who are involved in long distance trade, and certainly they were wealthy since they could make loans individually and repay them, because on some of the documents, over the document, there is an abbreviation SOL over it. That is from Solver. So it was repaid. So they were wealthy, but after these attestations, they did nothing. Obviously, they abandoned the island, or we don't have any case anymore.
Questions? Maybe I can ask something that's to Sophia about what one of the characteristics about Apollonius Romaios from Venus. What do you think about the word Romaios? Because we know since for us debates about this word. For example, the story is that it's about the Roman citizenship, but the from us and so on, it's only an ethnic. So the Apollonius is not a Roman, maybe a slave, maybe a slave, you know, some
Well, in the case I showed, we don't know whether he had the Dianomina, because we have only Apollonius. Before came to the recent gap, we do not know. In any case, I wanted to show this inscription because it is 2nd century or early 1st century BC, and it verifies a Western presence on Tinos. However, there are totally Greek names and then the ethnic Romeos. In Delphi, for example, in catalogs of Proxenon, these people were not slaves because they were Proxenon. I think in this case, Romeos in this early period defines the origin from Italy. All Italians, obviously for Greeks of that period, Romans. Perhaps. Maybe he had the Roman citizenship, but the Greeks did not know how to write their Roman name in a proper way. They understood only the Greek name, which was the cognomen, and wrote the cognomen and Romeos. Both explanations can be right. We do not know, but there are cases of Greek names and then the Romeos.
Also in Delos,
In Delos, exactly.
in the city, the Roman citizenship was so important for Italians, but maybe Greece was the same, even for maybe Italian as the Roman citizenship. Just another observation in this it's interesting that character from Provision that is called SAIA. Because she has Roman names, but his father is a Greek, so maybe we can see Roman interacting with some French people, Greece and Roman and some other questions? No one? Okay, so if there are no flowers in our garden. Thank you once again, Sophia, to be here with us and for your participation. And many thanks also to the students of the Hellenic that led some with the internet platform. Thank you very much.